Hi.
So, what is your name?
Edgar Vincent.
Nice to meet you, Edgar. I'm just going to be asking you a few questions about World War II and what your position and rank was in the military. So, starting off, I'm going to start with Pearl Harbor. So, because I feel like that sounds like a good start off point. Where were you when you heard the news that Pearl Harbor attacked?
Pasadena, California.
You were in Pasadena, California?
Uh-huh.
How did you react? Were you upset or happy or, I mean, not happy.
Of course I was upset, as was everybody,
Yeah.
that the Japanese had made an attack on our fleet in Pearl Harbor and killed a lot of people. So yeah, we were all unhappy about that.
So, I mean, other than the unhappiness, did you start, what was running through your mind? Did you want to be a part of?
I knew that I would be a part because you either enlisted or you got drafted to be in the service at that time, and so I elected to enlist, thereby giving myself a little better opportunity to do what I wanted to do, and so I enlisted in the Army Air Corps.
Oh, interesting. So how did after the bombing on Pearl Harbor, how did your opinion of the Japanese shift or concrete from what your opinion was of it before?
Well, I don't think most of us had thought much about the Japanese before that. They had been a long period of Japanese attacks on Asia, China, the Philippines, but they had never done anything directly with the homeland of the United States until they bombed Pearl Harbor. So, having not thought much about it, this was a big shocker then to find out that they were attacking our military in Pearl Harbor.
Where were you when you heard about the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and how did you take that?
I was on my way back from my rest leave from Tinian Island. That's where I was stationed, bombing Japan from Tinian Island, and I'd gone on rest leave to Hawaii for a week, and then on our way back, we learned about the dropping of the bombs. However, I knew that something special was going to be happening because the 509th Bomb Group parked their planes next to the 6th Bomb Group, which I was a part of, on Tinian Island. They parked, matter of fact, next to us, and they put a circle R on the tail, the same symbol that we had on my 6th Bomb Group, and they intended that organization be seen by the Japanese that were still on the island, and they had radios, binoculars. That we wanted it to appear as though these new people arriving were just some more replacement crews for the 6th Bomb Group, and we regularly got replacement crews, and they wanted to appear to be one of them. Nothing special. That was the intent. Of course, they were something special, and as they dropped some bombs that had never been dropped before.
So what was the R? What did the R stand for?
It was just a symbol. There were other letters, diamonds, circles, to identify if you got a lot of planes in the air trying to form up for a formation. You want to be able to identify what organization.
Okay. So let's talk about Paul Fussell was in the ranks during World War II, and he actually had said a quote saying, "Thank God for the atomic bomb," because he believed that the atomic bomb ended World War II. Now, what is your opinion, quote, and whether or not the atomic bomb ended the war?
The atomic bomb, perhaps revised by a few weeks, the announcement by the Japanese that they wanted to surrender. The ending of the war is dependent on the enemy saying, "I surrender." He hadn't said that yet. He didn't say it for a while. I flew some missions after the atomic bomb was dropped. What was going on in Japan was several weeks prior to the dropping of the atomic bomb. A group of 6 people, 3 civilian people and 3 military people, met and decided to surrender. And then there was a group, the military, saying, we want to have some conditions on the surrender. The condition was they wanted the emperor to remain on the throne. The other group wanted to surrender unconditionally, and they were arguing back and forth which way we should surrender. But they hadn't announced it to anybody, and they didn't announce it until sometime later. But the important thing is, and most people don't realize this, that Japan was devastated. They were hungry, they had no national resources, they had no fuel. Most of their pilots were killed, they were getting short of airplanes, they were out of gasoline. They should have surrendered long before they finally decided to surrender, but they had lost the war, and they finally came to the conclusion they had lost the war before the dropping of the atomic bomb. Now, it's I think they would have argued for more weeks before they came to the conclusion. The dropping of the bombs, what it caused to happen was it caused the emperor to get into the argument, and he helped force the decision to surrender unconditionally. We accepted the surrender with the condition, and matter of fact, it turned out to be the condition that they wanted. One part of it was that they keep the emperor on the throne, and we wanted it because occupying a country that has some form of government operational is a lot better than trying to occupy a country that has no form of government in place. So I have to depart from the argument that the atomic bomb ended the war. It was near the end of the war. I think it hastened the announcement, but it didn't make the decision to surrender. That had already been made.
Interesting.
Okay?
Interesting. Okay, because yeah, we were taught about this guy Paul, and he was the one, I mean, he said in God, because he believed that the atomic bomb was what ended the war.
The conclusion reached by 500 people that were sent to Japan to make an analysis of the strategic bombing of Japan. That was the conclusion that they reached by talking to lots of civilian and military people in Japan. And the conclusion was that hastened the emperor getting into it and urging a surrender announcement, and it certainly did that. It's too bad, but we didn't have any way of knowing that they had made a decision to surrender.
Interesting, because there was no communication.
There's no communication with any neutral country that says, hey, we're talking about surrendering. Please tell the United States we're talking about it. That didn't happen.
Wow.
So we believed that we were going to have to attack, invade, and that's why Okinawa was taken. That's the jumping off point for an invasion of Japan, because we believed that's what was going to have to happen.
Where did you choose to fly, or did you choose which branch you enlisted in, or was it assigned to you?
Well, I enlisted in the Army Air Corps, it was called at that time. After the war, it became the Air Force. But there wasn't a separate military organization called Air Force during World War II. It was the Army Air Corps. The Navy had an Air Corps too. So I enlisted in that, and it was therefore my hope to become a pilot.
Okay.
And most of the bombardiers and navigators and flight engineers were washed out pilots. Okay? They said, hey, you're not going to be a pilot, and hey, I'd like to be a bombardier then. So they go through bombardier training.
What's the difference between a bombardier and a pilot?
Pilot knows how to fly an airplane, bombardier knows how to run a bomb site, drop bombs.
Okay, I don't know.
And a navigator knows how to navigate us.
So how many people were in one?
11 per crew, and if you want, I'll point out where they all sat and what they did. And so I'm going to show you where the crew went, a little bit about the airplane too. This is a B-29. It's a model of my plane that I bombed Japan from. And the crew consisted of 11 guys. Up here in the very front is where the bombardier sat, and his sight is through this thick glass window here. Then there's an airplane commander here and a pilot over here on the other side, and they're about in this area here. And then right behind the airplane commander is the navigator. Behind the pilot is a flight engineer who had control of all of the 4 engines, and also a radio operator in this forward compartment. And then in this compartment is 3 gunners, a left blister, a right blister, and a top blister gunner. And in the tail is a tail gunner. He had 2 guns up the tail. Now those gunners didn't hold on to a gun. They had a gun sight that they focused on the incoming enemy airplane. And by changing a reticle, it described the wingspan of the airplane, and having identified the airplane so he knew the wingspan, and then he tracked that, and the combination of that input information, he had already set in altitude, temperature, and so the computer then calculated the gun that he's controlling, how much to lead this enemy airplane. Now, the guns on the airplane are 2 out of this bottom turret, 2 out of this forward bottom turret, 4 50 caliber guns in the top turret up here, and another 2 guns in the top turret back here. And they were all computer controlled, and the control of these turrets could be switched from one gunner to another gunner. The fellow who called for the guns, because he could see what we call a bogey, an enemy airplane approaching, then could have for him switched all of the guns that could bear on that target. So it's possible that to have several 50 caliber guns from each airplane shooting at a single enemy airplane. Now the B-29 is a big airplane. The wingspan, if you put one wing on a 50-yard line on a football field, the other wingtip would be 3 yards from a touchdown. It's about 3 stories high, the back and the tail. It has 2 bomb bays, a bomb bay here and a bomb bay here. And typically on a mission to Japan, we were carrying 6 tons or perhaps 7 tons of bomb. This section was not pressurized, but this was pressurized. The gunner compartment was pressurized, as was the tail gunner's compartment. These things are all new to the B-29. Never before had there been one this big, with the performance that this plane had, could carry the long range load that this could carry. So in its time, it was a new and supposedly wonderful airplane. It got 4 2,200 horsepower each engines. The props are 17 feet in diameter. And as I said, we took a big load of gasoline and a big load of bombs on a mission. The maximum gross takeoff weight, as described by Boeing for this airplane, was 120,000 pounds. On most all of the missions, we carried 125 to 128, 130,000 pounds, which consisted of the weight of the airplane, about 79,000 pounds, plus gas and bombs. But the missions were long. It's about 1,500 miles from the Marianas Islands, and the Marianas Islands are Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. Those three islands were all of the bombing, almost all the bombing of Japan took place by B-29s from those 3 islands. There was an attempt before we had those islands retaken, and therefore couldn't use them, to try to bomb from China. But we had to ferry gasoline, bombs, ammunition from India over the hump to a Chinese base that we could use, and they were terribly unsuccessful because it took so many trips over the hump to carry that much stuff to go on one mission. I heard the story. It takes 9 trips to equip one airplane to bomb Japan from China. So that was the problem. It was a long ways, and you had a long way to carry that much weight, therefore burn a lot of fuel. So it was a wonderful airplane, brand new in its time. Wouldn't be anything great and wonderful now, but it was then.
Did you know anybody who had experienced PTSD after the war?
Experienced what?
Post-traumatic stress disorder, I'm sorry.
I never heard that term until in the last 10 years, and you'll have to excuse me, I think it's become a popular term which a lot of guys use to explain things that aren't. It's probably real. I didn't have any of it, and I don't know of a single soul in the 6 Mom group. I do know one. He was what we called black happy. He had a nervous breakdown, but aside from that, I think all of the guys came back, assimilated into civilian life, picked up where they left off. Most of us hadn't finished school yet. And you didn't hear about post-traumatic stress disorder. You hear a lot about it now, and excuse me for my opinions, but that's all they are. I think it's an overused term for people who have some other problems.
But you don't think that where you sat during the war, you were very, high above the ground, you were getting shot at, but for people who were maybe face-to-face combat, looking at their...
That could be different too, you bet it could. But that airplane, cumulatively over the time I flew it, accumulated 141 holes in it. So you're looking at a guy who's been shot at a lot and missed all of the times.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of holes in the airplane, from fighters and from flak. You know what flak is?
No, it's black.
It's a cartridge sent up from an anti-aircraft gun on the ground that explodes at the elevation of the target. And they determined elevation with radar, and if the mission was at 28,000 feet, that's where they set this thing to explode at. So you'd have these black puffs of smoke around you, and that's the result of an explosion of a charge in this projectile, which exploded and scattered pieces of the shell of the projectile, cast iron, all over the sky. Well, some of them hit airplanes, and the other holes were made by fighters who came in shooting. Japanese fighters coming in and shooting at your airplane.
So did you ever get to see how far away the bullets were from where you were in the plane?
Yeah.
Were they really close to
One went back of my head,
my.
fairly close, and went in this side and out the other side.
So you felt it like almost
No,
like
I didn't feel it.
No?
No.
Too much adrenaline pumping through you?
No.
No?
Oh, no.
So you were pretty calm then when this was
No,
all...
you weren't calm, you're scared.
Okay, so you did have adrenaline going through you.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so, okay.
If people are shooting at you and fighters are coming at you, you can't do that without getting a little scared. They might get you.
Yeah, that's why I said you'd have adrenaline pumping through you, and you said no, but...
Well, as soon as we got off the bay, from over Japan, and on the trip mostly there and mostly back, the whole trip, most of it was over water. See, and nobody's shooting at you. So they could be real calm, not worried about anything. You may have, on a 15-hour mission, you may have had only an hour going over Japan.
And that's when
and
you
exposing
get shot
yourself to being shot at.
Okay. So you were getting shot at and then having to complete these...
You get shot at,
missions.
and then over the target, you get shot at some more, and then you get shot at until you get off the coast of Japan, over water, and then you're safe.
Okay. So what then were these missions to accomplish? What were you flying the 15 hours for?
Oh,
When you were doing that?
we did a lot of bombing of aircraft factories. We bombed a lot of other industrial targets where Japanese were making materials of war. The fire bombs, on the other hand, were dropped from low altitude and intended to start fires and burn up everything. And in the mission that Aaron talked about, we obliterated 15 square miles of Tokyo. One raid, one night. March, we took off on the 9th, but we dropped the bombs after midnight. So The Japanese call it the March 10th raid on
Yeah.
Tokyo. We call it the March 9th. And it obliterated 15 square miles and created about 130,000 casualties, 90,000 of which were deaths. Now compare that to Nagasaki, about 4 square miles, and I think the result of that was something in the order of 70,000
For Nagasaki.
deaths. Hiroshima.
Hiroshima.
Yeah, Nagasaki was a little bit less, but this is one raid on one city, and there were lots of fire raids on lots of cities.
So the fire raids, you're saying, had more of a destruction.
Much more destruction, yes.
Okay. In comparison to the lasting effects from the atomic bombing.
There were some people that got radiation poisoning that died, you know, not immediately, but maybe years later. And I'm not including those. I don't know how many of those there were, but certainly there were a lot of them. But the fire raids were terribly destructive because a Pathfinder plane, we called it, was ahead of all the other planes. He went down through the middle of the area we wanted to obliterate, dropping a bomb every block or two. And those fire bombs were clusters of napalm banded together with a central charge down the middle, designed to explode at about 1,000 feet and ignite all these tubes of jelly gasoline. They're burning, they fall on roofs and start buildings on fire. Then another airplane would, seeing that line of fires down through town, would go over a block or two and go down parallel, dropping its bombs. And similarly, some of the last guys were looking for a place that isn't on fire already. Where should I drop mine? Because such a big area was engulfed in flame. Very destructive to the Japanese. The theory was that, and it's true, a lot of the manufacturing in Japan was done by what they call cottage industry. You in your home had a little drill press and lathe, and you made some parts for this aircraft factory. And so you can kill the factory by bombing the factory, but all you've done is kill the assembly portion of making an airplane. The parts were still available, and they could reconstruct the ability to assemble and be back in business. But it was also a cruel destruction of an awful lot of people and an awful lot of country. The people of Japan didn't have a very high caloric content of food. They were out of food. And by the way, Japan, the reason they got themselves in the war in the first place was they're totally devoid of the materials, bauxite for aluminum and copper and iron ore and all of these things, and oil. They didn't have any of that, so they proceeded to go into Southeast Asia and Korea and Vietnam and China and the Philippines. They took them away from us. The purpose was to secure these raw materials they needed for their own industry. And they knew that the only people in the world that could stop them from doing that was the United States. So the way to stop that is go bomb their Navy so that they don't have any Navy anymore. And they did a very masterful job of that. Admiral Yamamoto said as a result, and he's the guy that led that attack, by the way, and he said, "I think we've awakened a sleeping giant." He was wondering if it was a very smart thing they had done, and true enough, they did awaken the sleeping giant and paid the price for it later on. But my gosh, that was in 1941 they did that, and it was 45 before they decided to give up.
So now let's get into your memories from the war.
Okay.
And I want to start off with, did you carry any reminders home with you from when you did?
Well, I've got a Japanese sword, and I've got a Japanese rifle, and I've got a .45, and I've got some ammunition made by Japan. I've got some medals that I brought home, and a lot of memories.
A lot of memories?
Yeah. I would like to say that people need to understand what went on in World War II. There's terrible information in textbooks in high school about what went on, and I don't think college is a heck of a lot better. And so people ought to recognize that we have a lot of, we don't speak any Japanese, we don't speak any German, because a lot of people won a war which otherwise we would have lost and been in serious trouble, and people ought to appreciate that, and don't,
That
by
we're
and
speaking
large.
English. Speaking of English, you're saying is what we should appreciate?
No, we should appreciate we have the freedom of living in a country who was attacked and who lost in their attempt to subdue the United States. So we still have some freedoms.
Okay.
We're losing some of them for other reasons at the moment, but yeah, I'd like to believe that a better job would be done of particularly teaching young people about what went on in the war. And those histories of what went on in the war are best told by people who lived then, and not by a professor who graduated from Cal 3 years ago and knows nothing. Excuse me. I shouldn't have said that. You might want to cut that out.
You cut that. All right, are we good?